Just as a guiding principle, I'd like to share with you something that is attributed to André Gide, a French philosopher. He said, "I always trust a man seeking the truth. I never trust a man who's found it." And I take that as a caution, because we all personally can get pretty excited about the inspiration and support we feel, but that doesn't mean we have to hit our neighbor over the head with it. That means so I'll be keeping this very much within my own experience, and be very welcoming your questions for clarification and things like that as well. I feel my life has been blessed. I've looked back on many occasions where the right person with the right advice and guidance or model was there. And looking back, I can see how crucial those moments were. I didn't at the time, but the sequence of them has been less, or rather greater, than random. And that's why I feel there's something within me or around me that helps me on my path here. My childhood was interesting. I grew up in the North Ward of Kitchener, up near King and Wellington. And that happens to be the boundary between St. John's Catholic Parish and Sacred Heart Catholic Parish. And since I was not a Catholic, I learned to run at an early age. We children took our religion very seriously in those days, and it made me into somewhat of a better athlete. I was being pursued not because I was a Christian Scientist, but because I was not a Roman Catholic. My family background, my grandmother was a devout Christian Scientist on my father's side. My mother was a Canadian-born Ukrainian descendant, and she was raised in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. But when she came to Kitchener with my father and my sister, she became a very devout Christian Scientist. She found my grandmother's experience very impressive. We had, assisted by a practitioner. In Christian Science, we do not have clergy. We elect our readers, but we have people who study further. And there's a first level called primary class, a 12-day immersion series. I've had that once I retired. And then a second level of being, what do they call it? I'm not even sure what it's called. Anyway, but they feel that people that healing is the central dividing, or that's not right, defining focus. Christian Science the word means the science of Christianity, and we feel that that was taught by Jesus, that the healing methods that he was showing us were a connection with a super power above the mortal existence. And that's where we look for our guidance. But I'm getting off my track already. Sunday school to age 20, but I was allowed to join the Mother Church. We're a worldwide organization based in Boston at age 12. But because our church does not have Cubs or Scouts, I went to Cubs at the Salvation Army, which used to be on Gaukel Street, just not far from where the current City Hall is. And I went to Scouts at King Street Baptist, which is at the corner of King and Water. And we, in those days, participated in church services. So from a very early age, I was certainly introduced to other religions. And that I found that interesting. And the participation was sincere. At youth time, I went to Eastwood Collegiate, which had just opened in 1956. And one of these people I talk about was a history teacher named Gordon Bankier. And we had, in grade 11 history, we did the Reformation. Well, we did ancient up to the Reformation. And he was an excellent scholar, and he really was informed on what he was doing. So I learned a lot about the fundamental positions, the creeds and things of many different faiths in my grade 11 history class. One of the points there was the Council of Nicaea, And that helped me understand that the Council of Nicaea was where the decision about Trinity or unity, whether God in three or God in one, was determined by vote of the council. And unfortunately, in those days, religious councils, it was really win or lose. And if you lost, you became a heretic. So even though the debate was prolonged about Trinity and unity, once the decision, the majority vote was for Trinity, then those of us who didn't think that was how God was expressed would become heretics. And being a heretic in the 5th century was a dangerous place to be. It was an interesting lesson, though, that came back to me, and maybe Sandy can help me here. The woman who was from the Unitarian Church in our opening group there, and she went to the Maritimes, I believe. She gave a lecture at the University of Waterloo. Sorry?
Anne Treadwell?
Yes. Anne Treadwell gave a wonderful lecture at the university there, and that's where I recognized our connection with the Unitarian position, and that the Trinity is not the correct definition, at least for us anyway. All right. Interesting thing happened at age 20 when I applied for membership in our local church. By that time, I was a social drinker, and I emphasize that. I liked my pint, and I liked the scotch. And then when I got in my teaching career, of course, I was in charge of some people and socializing and choirs and socializing. And I didn't see anything wrong with having a drink and a pint with my buds or whatever as well. But the local church at that time had decided that no alcohol was the demon. And so I was an adherent throughout most of my middle ages anyway, until I retired. And then at that point, I thought I can make the sacrifice. So I have become a non-drinker since 1997. Regretfully, I miss my scotch. It was nice, but it was never a problem, but only a problem for membership. So I was an adherent, and that kept me out of actively participating in the church. I attended, went through Sunday school and everything, but did not become a member. In my teaching career, mythology was part of my practice. I was teaching English and history, and I found that incredibly interesting in that I began to see parallels. I find a lot of Greek and Roman mythology turning up in our Christian tradition, and I think mythology is very important, but I think it's a dangerous thing because people seem to find their comfort level and stop there, where the mythology is really a process of learning and sharing and teaching. And when I look at the second chapter of Genesis, I can't believe that's in the Bible. It's campfire stories, and it's just, there's so many contradictions and so many shortcomings and lack of kind of, anyway, that's again a part of my personal development with criticism here. We did study other forms of worship in my teaching career, Islam and Buddhism, for example, and again, many parallels. One of the sad parts in my teaching career in my religion was that I began to see in the faces of my students that they had never seen many of them had never seen the inside of a religious building of a church. And I regret that deeply. Not that it didn't have to be my church, it could be any church. But to see a generation of young people who have not been introduced to the concept of religion, that was a very sad thing, and it was very prominent. I did join the Renaissance Singers at that time, and they are now they have passed out. But the founder of Renaissance religion was a very devout. Let's see, I'm not sure. Yeah, he was a Protestant. He wasn't Catholic, but high Anglican. Yeah.
Did you say Renaissance religion?
Renaissance Singers.
Thank you.
Yeah. And but the thing that happened there was in his dedication, he would take the choir to England every 5 years, and in the summertime, and we would take the place of the resident choirs in these English cathedrals and conduct the services, sing all the music. We were the relief so they could have a vacation. And in the course of that, I've sung at York Minster, Lincoln Cathedral, Gloucester, Westminster Abbey. And again, when you're participating in the service, the High Anglican service, that's a tremendous exposure and immersion in the Protestant faith. Well, no, I'm sorry, the Anglicans don't like be called Protestant. But it's the one problem I had in my spiritual growth at that time was the sense that in the high worship, God was distant. You had to light a candle, you had to be mentioned in the prayers, you had to call God's attention to your needs at that time or to what it was as well. And by that point, my sense of God was an ever-present presence that just it just surrounded you. You didn't need to go through another process to connect. So I certainly participated in the services. Because I hadn't been baptized in the traditional sense, when the choir went at Eucharist to the altar, I, of course, could not take communion. But I was very impressed at my friends in the Anglican Church, because they developed a process of, if I stood at the rail and crossed myself standing up, I would get a blessing, but I would not be participating in the actual Eucharist as well. So there was an accommodation there that impressed me as well. And certainly the dedication, sorry about that, was impressive. And I look forward to those experiences, to being part of that worship service. The connections developed in those services were very strong. The Stratford, Ian Sadler at St. Paul's, he does this on a similar basis. He forms choirs and then takes them to, he's also connected in England, and that was continuing the experience. In my church membership, which I did get full in 1997, then I got connected with the church community. And that led to an interesting another sequence here as well. I picked up the title of Committee on Publications. Now, Christian Science was developed in Boston in 1870 something, so the language is archaic, really. What the Committee on Publications essentially is public relations, and I like that, contact with the press and looking after things. And one of the things we're supposed to do in that office is protect Christian Science from misrepresentation. And that became actually an interesting job, because Scientology, unfortunately, is widely confused. The name is far too close to us. And the Jehovah's Witness, anything that has anything that's hostile to the medical tradition seem to come back to us, and that's not really the case. We resist, that's not the right word either. We look to Christian healing in the manner that Jesus showed us as our source of health and protection. We do not like to use medical professions, medications, things like that, but there is no absolute barrier or anything. There's no punishment, there's no anything, and we do not pursue people who use medication. No, we understand that it came to me when my mother was in her final days in the hospital in Guelph, and my son was very uncomfortable, elder son, going in, because he's a dedicated Christian Scientist as well. But as I walked through to my mother's place to be with her, and he with me, I thought, no, Colin, I said, we're in their temple. They are practicing healing as they see it, and we are practicing it as ours. But at this point, we're just walking in their temple. I felt that expressed my position on medication as well. Anyway, to get back to this thing, as the public relations man, I joined the Council of Churches on our behalf, and at a supper, I had the pleasant experience of seeing Bryce Palmer conduct a very controlled discussion, very nicely prepared discussion on, I believe it was 3 Abrahamic points with a Muslim scholar, an Islamic scholar, sorry. And they matched and shared, and we had our supper, and away we went. And I was impressed at that. Shortly after that, there was another Council of Churches dinner at Knox Presbyterian up in Waterloo, and it was dealing with the housing situation at that time. This is over 20 years ago. And after that session, they had the usual tea and crumpets and whatever in the church basement. And there was Bryce Palmer sitting at a table, chatting with people and taking that. And I had by that point developed taken the advice. My mother had pointed this out. Don't wait for the funeral to say nice things about a person. When they've done something nice, let them know you think it's nice at the time. So with that in mind, I walked over to the table where Bryce was, and I said, Mr. Palmer, I was very impressed at how well you conducted yourself and the information you had. And instead of just saying, thank you, go away, Bryce said, what church do you belong to? And I said, Christian Science. He said, would you be interested in joining a group of interfaith people? And I said, of course. And guess what that group was? IGR. So you see how things opened up. And of course, being an IGR for me has been just an incredible experience. It's one of the few meetings I really look forward to eagerly because of the good things that happen there as well. For example, Sufism. I went to one of the Shen workshops and went into, just on chance, to listen to the lecture a young man gave on Sufism. And I thought, this is all familiar to me. And it turns out that in Islam, there also are metaphysical religious people as well. And the lines and the positions and the understanding that Sufism has very similar to what we do in Christian Science. And I found that exciting, that we're not out on a wasteland someplace, that we are really part of a larger community that does think there is a spiritual aspect to our life and to what's happening. I saw forgiveness in a meeting where a priest and a Presbyterian minister came to show how their success in dealing with problems was forgiving. Darrell Bryant wrote Out of Galilee, and it's a book I recommend to all my Christian Science friends because it's a course he taught at Conrad Gable, and the thread of Christianity is strong throughout that. So from the earliest days, there were spiritual writers and leaders, and they're touched on in the book. And also, I've been into the Gurdwara many times, but those are all wonderful experiences that came to me through my connecting with Bryce at that memorable moment there as well. My current understanding, just to try to get on with this here, basically my sense of God has developed, and it hinges on very long time ago looking at a map of the galaxy. I think one of maybe Life magazine or somebody like that had done this poll out. And of course, the first thing you want to do is find Earth on that. And I did. And it was a little wee dot way over here in the corner. And that gave me humility. I thought, that's us, that little dot in all of this. And my sense that there was a presence here that was in control of what was going on. The universe, to me. And we are part of that universe. And so my sense of God is connecting with that sense. And the place where I move into religion is I feel that sense is wants me to be part of that harmony of the universe. It's not a cold medical or cold scientific thing. There's a presence there that really wants me to connect with it. And it's a presence that will give me harmony and protection. So there's no gender issue at all. It's not, in Christian Science, we talk about Father, Mother, God, which is a starting attempt at this idea. I take it beyond that. There is no gender to God. God is a presence, but a wonderful, powerful, supportive, protective presence, loving in the largest sense of the word. The healing focus, we feel that, and the sense of what Jesus was doing in this healing process. And if a number of things have reinforced that in me, that one of them was that if you look carefully at the record of the healings, he's demonstrating. Whenever there's a problem, he doesn't stand back and explain it. He says, come and watch, come and do, come and try. And I know it's part of my teaching sort of experience, but that's the way people learn things. You can stand and talk at them all day and they won't learn anything. But if you say, here, do this, try it again, that's where the learning takes place. And that, in our scriptures prior to the crucifixion, the evening at Gethsemane, for me, that's an ultimate teaching moment. Jesus is there, and he's been showing them how to overcome illness, accident, whatever, even death in those cases. But here he personally understands that he's been leading these students, these disciples and apostles, and here we are at Gethsemane, and he understands he's going to be crucified. And he at that moment says, I really don't think so, Father. But then he realizes, as a teacher, if he doesn't go through, this is the final lesson. Paul says, death is the enemy, the last enemy. Here is your teacher. Here's the last enemy. He says, thy will, not mine. And he had to do that. Otherwise, everything he'd been teaching them would be invalidated. So the Gethsemane moment for me is a very crucial moment in the Christian tradition. And I just watch that. And when he comes back, after he's resurrected, Darrell Bryant actually asked me this question. He said, was that his real body when he was resurrected? And I said, of course it was. He says, and then we thought about it, and I thought, wait a minute. He was getting into rooms that were locked. He was turning up in different places at different times. He could show his body to Thomas, but that body didn't limit his ability to be anywhere at any time as well. So that's the kind of spiritual notion that really you want to think about. And then, of course, the salvation that he offers is that he's showing us if we get back to God, if we connect with God, then the suffering is gone. So it's not a matter that he gathered up our sins and said, okay, hit me, you guys are fine. He's saying, no, you heal your suffering by getting back to God, and here's how you do it as well. So that's, again, a position that is very powerful for me. Within my own spiritual path, I find my church has been probably about 90% supporting. But I find Mary Baker Eddy's writing that is the textbook, the basis of it, and it's a poorly written book, difficult to read. And I'm sorry, and I'm not being picky here, but as a grammarian in that, there are places where it's not clear. And if it were written better, it would be very clear. So I had this hesitation. And of course, there are people in our church that I must never, ever say a bad word about Mary Baker Eddy or her writings. So that's part of the bureaucratic disappointment that I have with my church. But if it wasn't there, I wouldn't be here. So I certainly appreciate that as well. I think my path, there's one thing I did want to share with you before, my time here as well. The concept of God that I'm speaking about here as well, I think this universal presence is reinforced by something that H.L. Mencken wrote. And if you ever watch, I think it's Inherit the Wind, it's quoted there. He said, the journalist in Inherit the Wind is apparently supposed to be H.L. Mencken, but he was an American philosopher of considerable standing. He said, God created man in his image, and man, being a gentleman, returned the favor. So I put a lot in that as well too. Anyway, and a Baha'i statement I've read, they used to in the newspaper have quotations on a weekly basis. One life existence is not enough to achieve full spirituality. And I think about that sometime as well.